All right, I've actually been pretty excited to get to this director's commentary, and it's been a long time coming. And this is Gwildor, the heroic inventor of the cosmic key. And if you're looking at this character and be like, who the heck is that? Well, maybe you had this vintage toy, or maybe you probably didn't, since it came out at the very tail end of the line. But as a vintage toy in the Masters of the Universe line, it meant it was going to be part of classics. Now, Gwildor isn't exactly the strongest character in Masters of the Universe, or the most beloved, but he had a huge part in the Masters of the Universe 1987 movie, which has really become a cult classic at this point. I mean, it's got the very first appearance of Courtney Cox, right? That's got to count for something. Now, there were a lot of new characters that showed up in the film, and there were some older characters that got, movie versions, like Eva Lynn there. Gwildor was a character that was inserted into the movie for, well, basically cost. They needed a character that was He-Man's kind of magical slash inventor slash, guy that could be responsible for getting them to Earth. And, well, Gwildor in all of his fun was basically the studio's way of doing Orko without the CGI, because CGI didn't exist back then. Or, well, it did, but it wasn't that cheap or that good. So because Orko was just deemed too implausible to film, Gwildor was created to take Orko's place in the story and has now gone on to, have a place of his own. It is interesting looking back at the early movie reference or sort of concept art for Gwildor. And heck, you could have done a whole line of Gwildor figures based on the amount of maquettes and early drawings that were created to help bring this character to life. But we had a lot of restrictions on how we could do Gwildor. So yes, getting Gwildor of Theanor, to market, it was a challenge. And, Billy Batley, while he breathed life into him, it wasn't going to be a character that we could make that could look like the actor. We had to make him look like a toy, because this is a toy line. Now, I will admit the final sculpt actually looks quite like Billy, but Gwildor, as one of those rare figures, he had a fast path to the line. There are obviously a ton of characters that could have been part of an 87 movie line. The reason that we couldn't do this is because the studio, Warner Brothers, that owned the rights to the movie, we couldn't meet their minimum guarantee, which is the upfront fee you have to pay any studio for a license, and based on the SKUs we wanted to do, we just couldn't get that. So for fans who wanted, sadomasculine He-Man and Blade, that wasn't going to happen. But Super 7 was able to do figures based on the concept art. So the license didn't have to go through Warner Brothers, it just had to go through William Stout. And it's cool because these figures based on William Stout's concept art fit perfectly with the Mattel figures. The reason Mattel never did the William Stout collection is because, well, let's just say William Stout and Mattel don't exactly have a good relationship. But when the line went to Super 7, hey, now William Stout could work with them. All right, enough about that. Let's get back to Gwildor specifically and how he wound up as a figure in Masters of the Universe Classic. So as I mentioned, this was one of the rare figures, which would also include Blade and Sora there in the little red box, that were actually in the original toy line. And because of that, Gwildor then wound up on things like cross-sell posters and mini-comics and, well, a whole bunch of media that was put out by Mattel. Now, even though he appeared in other media, and media that, again, was created by Mattel or licensed out by Mattel, because of that just weird issues with trademarks, the only version of Gwildor that we could look at for reference for the Classics toy was the original toy. We could not look at any of his appearances in mini-comics, Marvel comics, anything. It was literally look at the vintage toy and make an update of that. Now, the Horseman did go a little movie, I will say, and by that I mean like the details on the coat, they didn't, they weren't quite the same as the vintage toy. I mean, not to mention the face sculpt. The thing was, we didn't have time to resculpt it, and it was deemed that it basically looked enough like the vintage toy. And there was obviously a lot of leeway in exactly how you were going to translate the vintage toy into classics. So while we couldn't do things like include accessories that were specific to the movie, we could still have kind of some movie references through nods in the outfit. That wasn't really going to be a big issue. But we couldn't give him the glasses and hat. It's like, it was a weird line. It really was. Like, we could do this, but we can't do that. As an example, originally, Gwildor was going to come with the keyboard that was used as the, the input device for the Cosmic Key when they were trying to get back to Eternia. Spoiler alert for a, 35-year-old movie. So unfortunately, we had to cut this accessory. It was sculpted, but because it was in the movie and not from the toy, the original toy, we couldn't include it. Instead, what we did is we increased the size of one of the cosmic keys that the Horseman created and basically based the color scheme of it off of the original toy. When they originally sculpted it, the color scheme was in blue and silver like in the movie. So it was a tricky thing. We had a blue and silver version that came with pre-Eternia He-Man, but it didn't look like the movie toy. And then the new version that the Horseman sculpted in the movie colors was going to be too close, so we had to make it the toy colors on a movie sculpt. I know, it's crazy, but these were like the weird rules. And by also enlarging it and making it a bigger accessory, the Horseman originally sculpted it the size the Cosmic Key would be, to be handheld. But we enlarged the tool and made it what we called the prototype Cosmic Key, as if before he made the Cosmic Key, he obviously had to make first one, and prototypes are usually larger before you can make a small handheld device. So that's the story behind a movie-looking Cosmic Key, painted like the original toy, expanded in size to add value to a figure because other accessories like the keyboard had to be taken away. And as I noted, while the sculpt did wind up looking a lot like the actor Billy, the thing was, there's a lot of other actors that could have looked like too. So that was kind of how we got away with it, was like, no, it's not, it's sculpted based on the mask. And, we're not obviously sculpting Billy's face. And we're not. I mean, the Horsemen were not. They were sculpting the mask. So it is a figure that looks a little bit more movie than probably should. We could have also looked at maybe like a more 2000X-y interpretation, but we knew fans were going to they wanted the movie one. And we tried to do everything we could to get as close to it while still noting those issues with color and sculpt detail. So yeah, he was a really crazy figure to work on, and he wound up being on an oversized card, and we charged like a weird premium for him because all the accessories that got jammed in, and even though he's shorter, he's heavier or stocky, so he still took up a lot of plastic. It's crazy. What can I say? Gwildor's a crazy toy. One of the other really kind of, I guess you could say, unique things about him, personally for me, is this was the very last Masters of the Universe Classics toy I got while working at Mattel. Literally on my last day, the day that I turned in my badge, when I got to my desk that morning and I knew that I was, resigning that day, I had already brought home most, like my personal stuff, and I was basically just going to go in and resign. But there was Gwildor on my desk, and I'm like, oh no, all right, now I got to go get a pass to get him out of the building. Then I'll come back in and resign. So yeah, that was kind of the crazy story. So after I got a property pass for him, got it signed out of the building so I could have my Gwildor sample. Then I came back in the building, found my VP, and resigned. So that was kind of like, that was my crazy morning. So Gwildor will always be kind of part of my memories of basically leaving Mattel, because I actually was curious how many MOTU figures I was going to wind up be able to get before I left, and getting one on my very last day, hey, if it's going to be anyone, it should be Gwildor.